Welcome to Counselor, Beyond Conventional Defense.
Hello and welcome to Counselor, Beyond Conventional Defense, the podcast that challenges the traditional approach to criminal defense and takes a deeper look at how the justice system can evolve. As always, my guest is attorney William Pernik, a trailblazer in criminal defense whose approach is anything but conventional. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today we are going to dive into domestic violence. William, great to have you back.
Thank you, Kevin.
All right, well, we're going to dive into another heavy topic. I'm excited to hear about your approach to something that is that's a tough subject. Domestic violence charges obviously can carry serious consequences in California. Can you walk us through the potential legal, personal, professional impacts someone might feel if convicted of domestic violence in California?
Thank you, Kevin. That's a most excellent question. Domestic violence cases are actually some of my favorite cases to handle with my approach of going beyond the conventional defense for the same reasons that you just named. And that is that domestic violence cases have incredible cost in areas, not only the legal system, meaning how much time a person can do if they're convicted of a domestic violence, what will be the terms of probation, but they could have so many more other consequences on person's life. In a strict penal sense, as far as what amount of time a person could get, it's important to understand that in California, any offense that is committed against your partner, against your former partner, against the parent of your child, or anybody else that meets the legal definition of a special relationship will be considered a crime of domestic violence. So you could commit any kind of crime against your former partner or current partner, and it's going to be considered a crime of domestic violence, even if it's not a violent offense like you slapping a person, hitting a person, or something along those lines. That being said, the most common offenses that we see would probably be batteries and assaults. Battery can be a misdemeanor battery if it's just an offensive or harmful touching of a person, like you push your partner, you grab them, slap, things of that nature. Or it could be a felony charge if there is an injury, if an injury is serious. It could be a felony that now has an allegation of a serious or great bodily injury in a domestic violence setting that could put a person in prison for up to 9 years if you have a conviction for domestic battery or for assault with a great bodily injury attached. Person's prior record could significantly amplify consequences of one's behavior, and depending on person's current charges, prior record, and some of the facts and circumstances of the case, you could end up being charged with a serious or violent felony in California in this domestic violence scenario. And serious and violent felonies in California are considered strikes, and they carry additional significantly amplified consequences leading up to potentially even a sentence of life in prison. So if you have 2 or more serious or violent prior offenses and your current case is a serious or violent felony, you're eligible for 3-strike sentencing, which could be really, really scary to people just hearing that this could be the rest of my life. And it was just a really, really awful fight with my significant other. So number one, domestic violence cases are super serious sometimes, and they can carry super significant consequences sometimes. And the rest of the time, they're going to carry really unpleasant consequences, not limited to just jail time or prison time, but also if you're placed on probation, you have to complete very lengthy period of 104 hours of 52 weeks of domestic violence counseling. You have to pay special fines and fees. You will lose certain constitutional rights forever. Like if you're ever convicted of a crime of domestic battery, you will lose your right to own or possess firearms or ammunition for 10 years under California law, life prohibition under federal law. It could carry significant professional consequences for a person because of professional licensure. This could be a problem that you have to report to your licensing agency. If you are a contractor, if you are a doctor, if you're a lawyer, if you are a nurse, relationships are complicated. Things happen, and people we are most close to are the ones that sometimes can provoke us or get under our skin the most. And if we're not living healthy lives, if we don't have healthy relationships, sometimes people react badly. Sometimes people overreact. Sometimes people commit really bad acts under these circumstances, and now they could threaten person's employment. It affects relationships. It will affect your ability to be a parent. You could lose custody of your kids. When you are convicted of an offense involving domestic violence, if your spouse decides to leave you, they can use the fact that you were violent with them and you're a domestic abuser in order to trigger a presumption in family court that they should be the one getting custody. It could be used to potentially impact how much spousal support somebody is going to have to pay. So all of these things weigh very, very heavily. And then let's not forget that oftentimes people want to remain a couple. They want to remain a family unit. They have a life they build together. They have a home. They have a nest they build together. They have a family, kids, other people in their network. And so when you have a charge involving domestic violence, it doesn't just affect the legal side of it. It affects all of it, which is why I really like applying a more comprehensive approach to truly identify the reasons why a domestic violence incident happened and how we can make sure this never happens again, and how can we provide a person with the right tools, not just the court-approved 52-week program, but how do we actually get to the bottom of what went wrong in this relationship with this couple to make sure this never happens again, and the sanctity of their relationship, their home, their marriage, parent-child relationship does not get violated that way again.
Let's unpack that a little bit. What is it about domestic violence situations that you feel makes your approach so ideal for it? What factors make the unconventional approach of yours positive in helping in these situations?
I think to understand why we have to go beyond conventional defense in domestic violence cases, we have to understand what conventional defense actually means. Okay? So let's take an example of a typical domestic violence case where I'm going to get a call, often from the other spouse, the spouse who has been victimized, saying that her, could be his, but it's predominantly women. So for sake of this example, that her husband or boyfriend is in jail, that she called the police, that there was a bad incident, that this is what happened, but he's the main provider. They have children together. She doesn't want him convicted. She doesn't know what will happen to her if he's convicted, and she needs me to help. Okay? So conventional approach. I go visit with the client. I get my client's version of the story. And my client will say something along the lines of, for example, in this example, my client could say, well, I came home. I had a couple of drinks. She really doesn't like it when I drink. She was on her phone. I wanted to see what's on her phone, so I started looking at her messages. She didn't like it, and she grabbed the phone out of my hand, but I thought that she was talking to another man, so I got upset, and I slapped her, or I took the phone and I threw it against the wall and it broke. And then she told me she was going to call the police. I yelled at her. I tried to stop her from calling the police, and I held her down until she calmed down a little bit. And then I told her, do not call the police. This is stupid. You're going to get me in trouble. No one's going to pay your bills. You'll get me deported, etc. Okay. In that scenario that I have just described, which is not that uncommon, we are dealing with a potential felony charge of false imprisonment for holding this person down by force, not letting them leave, with a serious offense or a strike in California for dissuading a witness by telling them not to call the police, misdemeanor interfering with emergency communication for not letting the person conclude a 911 call, and maybe a misdemeanor domestic battery for the force that was used, maybe a little bit more, and maybe a felony assault if the person is really, holding the individual down, or perhaps strangulation is involved, things of that nature. Okay. Now, there were only 2 witnesses to what happened. Okay. By the time police showed up, the woman in this example may or may not have any marks or injuries. Okay. So how do you defend conventionally against this? Well, your client could, for example, argue that she's mad at me, she plans to leave me, she's having an affair, and when I exposed it, or when I caught her, that's when she got mad, she got crazy, I had to use self-defense. That's one defense in a domestic. There's really 3 main defenses in a domestic violence case. The best one is self-defense, because everybody understands it. And if you were in fear of being touched unlawfully or being hit unlawfully, you can use reasonable and proportional force in California to defend yourself or somebody else, perhaps a child. Okay? So self-defense is one standard defense that you use in a domestic violence case. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. The second type of defense you use is the accident defense. I didn't cause the injury. The person injured themselves by accident. For example, I was standing on this side of the door. I was arguing. She was arguing with me, or he was arguing with me. I got frustrated. I slammed the door shut because I just couldn't hear any more of this. And it just so happened that, my spouse was walking through the door. When I kicked the door closed or slammed the door shut, it hit her in the face. Okay. So I didn't cause this injury willfully or intentionally. This was by accident. Accident would be a second good defense.
Okay.
The third type of defense would be, somebody calls to report an incident involving domestic violence. They have some marks on their body, and you argue that I didn't inflict the marks, somebody else did it. Maybe they're self-inflicted, maybe a third party inflicted this, maybe this was the mysterious lover who left marks in the throes of passion, or there was another fight or confrontation or whatever. You laugh, but these things happen.
No. I mean, I know. Yeah, totally.
And then sometimes you have this really unusual defenses. One of my favorite was the defense of necessity. I once had this case. Have you ever heard of a necessity defense to a domestic violence?
No.
Okay. So a necessity defense is a really unique legal concept which justifies in some circumstances other than a homicide, a person committing a crime, doing something that's legally not allowed, if they are acting in a sudden emergency that they did not create, they didn't have other legal alternatives, and the harm that they are avoiding by their actions is greater than the harm they're causing. Okay?
Okay.
So society wants to give people a way in these extreme emergencies to use force or perhaps commit a crime if it's a far lesser crime than the danger you faced. And so I had this unusual case. It was a number of years ago where I represented this gentleman who was a contractor. He was a very strong guy who had a significant other who happened to be albino. Okay, so this lady had very white, translucent skin. Okay, and if you've never seen what an orbital fracture looks like on a person who has this condition, I can assure you it looks horrible. It does not play well in front of a jury, and jury trial is where we ended up. So my client was arguing with his significant other as they were driving in a car. They were having one of these really awful days where everything was going wrong. It started in a house. It continued on a drive to, I believe it was the DMV. Okay, nothing good happens on the way to the DMV, right?
That's true. It's a bad day anyway, right?
It's certainly a bad day once you get there and they
Yeah,
tell you that,
true.
now serving number B00003 at the window number 27. Then you know your day has gone terribly
Yep.
wrong. But at any rate, so my client is driving in the car. They're continuing to argue back and forth. He has a can of soda in his hand, and he's so frustrated with his significant other that what he does is he tosses it. And as he tossed it, it struck the ceiling of their pickup truck and spilled on the woman. She, by that time, has had it with him. They have been arguing for several hours. And so what she's done while he's driving a car at freeway speeds is she started hitting him and striking him. She just completely lost it. Understandably so, because she just had it with him.
Yeah.
And so momentarily, my client ended up losing control of the vehicle and they were about to crash. And so what he did is he struck her and struck her hard with his hand. And unfortunately, he's a strong guy. He wasn't aiming. He hit her in the area that ended up sustaining an orbital fracture. It was her orbital socket. It was a horrible injury. Police were called, blood, really horrible appearance. And we went to jury trial. It was a conventional defense approach. We argued the defense of necessity. My client was looking at many years in prison, 9-year maximum. And jury found that it was necessary for him to do this to save not only himself, but also her, because of the unique scenario where they were driving and it posed a danger to both of their lives, frankly.
And other people on the road, if you really, obviously too. Yeah.
People on the road, also a degree of self-defense.
Yeah.
So that's a conventional approach. Okay, example. But in a beyond conventional approach, we can look at much different factors. Okay, we can look and see, do we have issues of communication within this couple? Is this a couple that has been married or in a relationship for so long they forgot how to talk to one another? Is this a couple that's struggling with issues of infidelity? Is this a couple that doesn't know how to process life challenges, be they financial concerns or maybe a young child? Do we have a situation where, maybe the wife has mental health issues and the husband is drinking too much, or vice versa, or they drink together and this is the only time they are functional together? And if so, we need to start formulating the correct approach. This incident didn't happen because Joe hates all women and Maria specifically. This incident happened because Joe was drunk, because Maria and him stopped talking for some time. They were talking over each other. They were not communicating with one another. Maybe we need to get Maria into counseling so she can understand some of the issues that she was struggling with on her own, such as maybe untreated trauma that led to some distancing and some problems in the relationship. Joe needs to get a hold on his drinking, which is a huge problem in the relationship. We dig deeper into his background. We understand that there are some problems from his childhood, that he's witnessed domestic violence when he was growing up. Perhaps underneath the surface, there is some sort of underlying mental health condition on top of his alcoholism. And then we petition the court for a alternative, such as potentially let's get him into treatment, let's get him into rehab, let's make sure that we're addressing all of the underlying problems. We send the couple to a couples counselor. We have the two of them work together. We have a wonderful therapist that specializes, for example, in working with couples who had an episode involving domestic violence, because how do you move past that kind of breach of trust? If you don't realize that there are professionals you can go to who specialize in this, you might think this is it. This is the end of our life together. This is the end of our relationship. That's not true. You can recover from it. Or sometimes you go into treatment and therapy and you realize, you know what, this is a relationship that's never going to work out. It's toxic. It's flawed. We got into it for the wrong reasons. We need to go our separate ways. And so by going beyond conventional defense, we can appreciate the underlying reasons and the complexities that this case will present. These people have families together. They have kids together. Putting them in a trial puts them on a path of direct confrontation with one another. One person will have to be found guilty, the other one not guilty. The only way someone is not found guilty is if somebody else is lying or is a person who started the fight, right? What is that going to do to the relationship? How do they live together as a couple later? How do you parent a child you had with this woman if you just went to trial and called your child mother, a liar? How do you convince the judge to not issue a criminal protective order that's going to prevent you and your wife from communicating with one another, and will cause you to have to do child custody exchanges at the police station? See, none of these things you can handle very well by approaching this conventionally, which again will look at the facts of the case. Any legal basis to exclude evidence will involve heavy amount of investigation, because the way you win domestic violence cases is you prove that the other person is either a liar or violent himself or herself, and that your client is a peaceful individual who is an honest individual. I'm oversimplifying it a little bit, but that's the basic design, and it doesn't address the complexities of what do these people do as a couple once the case is over. What do they do if they have to raise their kid together? We could have a woman who is claiming that the injury was inflicted a certain way, okay? And we have medical experts who we can send photographs of injuries and medical reports, and they can conclude that based on these medical records, based on this injury, this person is lying. So once you bring somebody's wife to court, once you bring somebody's spouse to court, and you prove in front of everybody that that person is a rotten liar who falsely accused the parent of her child of domestic violence, what is that going to do? And so sometimes people will choose a different approach, one that will result in charges being dismissed, and yet not putting the relationship in peril, not making the other person the target of the defense, not forcing your lawyer to cross-examine the mother of your child or the father of your child. And in many cases, it works. I want to give you one final example, if I may.
I think it's interesting what you were saying about how, like, the conventional approach is, we find who's at fault, we punish them, all right, move on. And it's so much more nuanced than that, and you're not getting to the root of the problem, like you said. I think it's a very, very interesting concept. But yeah, I would love to hear an example.
I'll give you an example of a case I handled some time ago, and this was a case that involved a police officer. Okay, police officers are people who get a lot of consideration in court. When they come and testify as professional witnesses, everyone assumes they're telling the truth. Red carpet gets rolled out before them. Not supposed to, but that's how it happens in practice, okay? When a police officer, though, gets in trouble, there is a double standard in how they get treated. the sky will come down crashing on that police officer because there's this perception of abuse of trust, etc. So it's actually really difficult to defend police officers because of the double standard. When they're doing things supposedly right, they get a lot of extra credibility. If, God forbid, there is even a suspicion or accusation in criminal court that they've done something wrong, everyone will treat them so much worse than your average client. That may not be what people believe from seeing some high-profile examples of police shootings and acquittals and things like that, but that is the daily reality when you work with this population of clients. So I had a police officer who was involved in a domestic violence incident with his fiance, who was also a police officer, okay? The two of them were in a hotel room, some alcohol was consumed, a loud fight happened, a struggle happened, injuries were found, okay, on my client predominantly, and both of them were duking it out and knew how to fight. So when police showed up, they initially thought that my client's significant other may have been the individual who was the primary aggressor. As they were about to arrest her, my client stopped this by saying, no, 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 I did it. I'm the person who started the fight. Immediately, he was taken into custody, handcuffed, obviously incredible professional repercussions for somebody who is a cop, right? If you get convicted of a domestic violence offense, you can't carry a gun. Can't carry a gun, can't be a police officer, okay? Sure. If you have a pending felony charge, your department, whatever agency you work for, they're not going to want a suspected felon to be working. So they're going to suspend you. They're going to look for a way to get rid of you, okay? And then obviously this was a situation where the couple wanted to stay together. They loved each other. They cared about each other. So do we start this conventionally by arguing the other person committed the crime? My client was just defending himself. She was the primary aggressor. What does that do to the couple? What does that do to what's going on? So instead, what we did is we started looking at underlying issues. And we discovered that this relationship had a lot of issues, that both my client and his partner were really in dire need of somebody to teach them how to interact and communicate as a couple. And then specifically looking at my client's background, it turned out that alcohol was something he really had an unhealthy relationship with. Being a police officer is incredibly stressful. And if you come into this line of work, being a cop, for the right reasons, but with a lot of baggage, psychological damage included, it can really amplify what's going to happen to you and how it's going to affect your mental health. And this is exactly what happened to my client. And so he ended up getting super intense treatment. He pursued treatment through work-related resources. He pursued treatment through private counselor. He engaged in couples therapy and couples counseling with his significant other. He has done so much work that we were able to overcome this double standard and this presumption that police officers should know better and should not be extended these leniencies. And we were able to persuade the district attorney to grant diversion. His partner saw the effort that he's putting in to fix himself and to save the relationship. So she actually, through her own attorney, expressed the desire to see him continue in treatment. He was never convicted of a crime, so he couldn't be fired for not being able to carry a gun. He didn't have those consequences. Instead, he pursued treatment very aggressively for more than 2 years, got so much healthier and so much stronger and so much better, addressed the underlying problems in their relationship and personal issues, and the case got dismissed. No admission of guilt, no finding of criminal liability, no loss of professional employment, no loss of constitutional right, and a person who emerges from the darkest chapter of their life so much stronger and so much healthier. That's going beyond the conventional defense. That's a much better way to handle it than to basically engineer a direct confrontation between these two witnesses in a room filled with spectators where all of their dirty laundry gets aired. I'm not saying that it's an approach in each and every case, but if you understand that 50 to 75% of all of the people that I meet need it, you will see why I must utilize it, and I must teach everybody else on my team to utilize it so much more often.
I think that's very powerful. That's really amazing. That's another success story, and I appreciate you sharing it with us. It's unconventional, but it sounds like it works. Well, thanks for tuning in to Counselor Beyond Conventional Defense with attorney William Pernik. To connect with William and the team, head to perniklaw.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. William, thanks so much for all the insight as always. Really appreciate the stories and you kind of talking us through that. It was a great conversation.
Thank you, Kevin. It's always a pleasure. I look forward to our next week's recording. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.